They laughed at the old man with the dusty clothes and a sack over his shoulder until he said 5 words that stopped the entire bank. "I'm here for my building." What happened next left everyone speechless. "The owner is here." The bank was bustling that morning. Phones rang. Shoes clacked on tile floors, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Tellers smiled through tight schedules. Customers shifted impatiently in line, some tapping away on their phones, others staring at the overhead screens announcing loan rates and credit offers. Then the glass doors slowly creaked open. Heads turned, but only for a second, until they saw who it was. In walked an elderly black man. His clothes were worn and dusty, hanging loosely on his thin frame. His shoes had clearly walked thousands of miles. But most noticeable was the massive burlap sack slung over his shoulder. Not a backpack, not a suitcase, a sack, the kind people used decades ago to carry grain or coal. He shuffled slowly, each step deliberate. His face was calm, wrinkled by time, but there was a sharpness in his eyes, a quiet alertness, like he saw more than anyone realized. He walked up to the front desk and waited. The receptionist didn't even look up at first, still typing away. "Excuse me, ma'am," the old man said, voice gentle but clear. "I'd like to speak to the bank manager." Now she looked up and frowned. "Sir," she said, with the polite coldness only customer service professionals can master, "if you're here to donate something or need social assistance, there's a charity center 2 blocks down." The man didn't flinch. "I'm not here to donate," he said. "I'm here for something else." "Oh," she asked, eyebrows raised. "And what might that be?" "I'm here," he said, adjusting the sack on his shoulder, "because I own this bank." The receptionist blinked, and then she laughed, out loud. A customer nearby looked over and smirked. Another whispered to the person next to them, "What's he going to do, buy the bank with bottle caps?" The laughter started to ripple through the room. One man in a tailored suit leaned over at his friend and said loudly enough for the old man to hear, "Some people really need to get their meds checked." But still, the old man didn't flinch. He leaned a little closer to the receptionist and said once again, calm, confident, unshaken, "Tell your manager, the owner is here." That's when things began to shift. The laughter stopped, not completely, but just enough to notice the tension in the air, like someone had turned the volume down, waiting to hear what would happen next. The receptionist, suddenly unsure, tapped a few keys on a computer and picked up the phone. "Yes, Mr. Lambert," she said quietly. "There's the gentleman here. He says he needs to speak with you about ownership of the bank." Pause. "No, not a joke. He's serious." "Yes, I know how it sounds." A few minutes later, the manager came out. Youngish, late 30s maybe. Expensive watch, slick haircut, confident walk. He approached with a forced smile. "Good morning, sir. I hear you have some questions." "I do," the old man replied, reaching into his sack. At this point, security had subtly stepped closer. One guard stood by the main entrance. Another positioned himself near the front desk, just in case. The man pulled out a thick, time-worn envelope from the sack and handed it to the manager. "These," he said, "are the original property deeds for this land, this building, the foundation this bank sits on." The manager blinked, confused. Okay, sure. Let me just take a look at this." He opened the envelope and removed several aged documents. Yellowed paper, official seals, stamped signatures. Real ink, not copies. The laughter in the bank had stopped completely now. The manager turned page after page. His confident smile began to fade. His brow furrowed. "You say you own this land?" he asked. "That's right," the old man nodded. "Purchased it outright in 1963. Leased it to the original owners of this building in 1981. There's a clause in the agreement that says if ownership ever changes hands, I can reclaim full rights to property." "Sir," the manager said, suddenly cautious, "our bank just went through a merger last year. The parent company changed." The old man smiled faintly. "Exactly." And just like that, no one was laughing anymore. The manager, a well-dressed man in his 40s, came out with a forced smile. His suit looked expensive, tailored to fit just right. He had the air of someone used to being in control, someone who didn't deal with unexpected situations, especially ones involving dusty old men carrying burlap sacks. "Good morning, sir," he said politely, but there was a layer of irritation beneath his tone. "What seems to be the issue?" The old man stood tall, his back slightly hunched by time but not broken. He looked the manager straight in the eye and said with the kind of calm that rattles nerves, "No issue. Just here to inspect my bank." The manager blinked. A pause hung in the air, awkward and heavy. "Your bank?" "Yes," the old man replied, gently lifting his sack onto the front desk. He unrolled the top and pulled out a thick envelope, weathered, sealed with old wax, and bound by a red string. "Inside," he continued, "are the original deeds to this property. Land, building, and all. You'll see my name on them." Now the manager did laugh. Just a little, a short, sharp chuckle, as if trying to defuse an absurd joke. He looked around, scanning for a camera crew or maybe a prank show. But all he saw were curious customers leaning in, employees whispering, and 2 security guards inching closer. "All right, sir," the manager said, clearly losing patience. "Let's not cause a scene. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The old man didn't move. Instead, he calmly slid the envelope across the counter. "Go ahead. Take a look." The manager glanced down, then back up at the guards. "Escort this gentleman outside. I'll contact the police if necessary." But just as the guards moved forward, one of them, the older one, the kind who had seen too many things go sideways, held up a hand. "Wait," he said, nodding at the envelope. "This looks official." The room fell silent again. The younger guard leaned in, his hand still resting near his belt. The older guard carefully untied the string and opened the envelope, revealing a stack of aged documents, some yellow with time, others covered in dense, handwritten ink. The papers were filled with legal language, county stamps, and signatures that hadn't been touched in decades. The manager squinted and leaned in. "Where'd you get these?" he asked, now with a bit less sarcasm. "I told you," the old man replied. "They're mine. Bought this land in 1963. Every penny I earned, I put into this place. Back when no one else wanted it. They said it was worthless, a patch of dirt near the railway." "And you what? Build a bank?" the manager asked skeptically. "No," said the man. "I leased it, long term, to a financial startup that eventually became this bank. That lease had some conditions. One of them was that if the company ever merged or changed hands, the lease would dissolve and full ownership would return to me or my descendants." The manager stared at the documents, scanning each page with growing unease. He flipped to the last one. There it was, in old ink, barely fading after all these years. "In the event of ownership change, the lease shall terminate, and full rights revert to the original landowner, Ezekiel Thomas." That was the old man's name. And the bank? It had just gone through a major merger 6 months earlier. Suddenly, it was no longer funny. The manager swallowed hard. He pulled out his phone and stepped aside, whispering rapidly into the receiver. The guard stepped back. One of them, now visibly uncomfortable, gave Ezekiel a small nod of respect. Customers were no longer whispering. Now they were listening. One older woman near the ATM whispered to her daughter, "He might actually own it." Within minutes, the bank's legal team arrived. 3 people in business attire rushed into the lobby, led into the back by the manager and carrying the old documents with them. Ezekiel? He stayed calm. He sat on one of the lobby chairs and waited, legs crossed, sack back over his shoulder like nothing was unusual. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, the manager returned. His expression completely changed. The arrogant smirk was gone. His face was pale. "Mr. Thomas," he said quietly, I believe we owe you a sincere apology. It seems your documents are legally valid, and due to the merger, your lease agreement is now in effect, meaning the property belongs to me." Ezekiel finished. "Yes, sir," the manager said. "Legally, it does." The bank was now operating on land they no longer had the right to occupy. Just like that, The old man with the burlap sack had flipped the entire situation on its head. Turns out, the man's name was Ezekiel Thomas, a quiet, humble man in his 80s who had lived in the town for decades. He'd been invisible to most. Just another old face on the street, a shadow in the background of small-town life. People passed him by every day, never guessing the quiet power he held. No fancy clothes, no car, just a sack, a cane, and a memory sharper than most. But what people didn't know, what no one ever bothered to ask, was Ezekiel's story. Back in the early 1950s, when segregation still stained much of the country and opportunity for Black Americans was limited by both law and hate, Ezekiel was a young man with big dreams and no roadmap. He worked tirelessly, 3 jobs at once. During the day, he swept floors at a mechanic shop. In the evenings, he worked at a local diner, washing dishes. At night, he cleaned offices downtown. While others partied, rested, or gave up, Ezekiel saved. Every crumpled dollar, every tip, every quarter. Not because he wanted a new car or a better wardrobe, but because he had his eye on something no one else seemed to want: a rough, dusty plot of land on the edge of town near the old railway. People laughed at him back then, too. That land ain't worth a dime, they'd tell him, shaking their heads. Ain't nothing out there but dirt and train noise. But Ezekiel didn't care. He saw something others didn't. He saw the future. In 1957, after nearly 7 years of saving, he bought that plot of land outright. No mortgage, no loans, just cold, hard-earned cash. And he didn't stop there. Over the years, while working full-time and raising a family, Ezekiel quietly expanded. He bought the neighboring lots when they came up for sale, small, forgotten patches of ground no one cared about. Bit by bit, he stitched together nearly an entire block of land. People still laughed, called him foolish. But he didn't sell, didn't flip it, didn't let the noise sway him. Then, in the 1980s, something unexpected happened. A small financial company, barely a bank at the time, was looking to build a new branch. They needed land close to the growing downtown, but most of the available space was either too expensive or already claimed by large property groups. Except for one stretch of land, Ezekiel's land. The bank's representatives set up a meeting. They expected to negotiate with someone simple, someone easy to push around. But Ezekiel showed up prepared. He brought a lawyer friend, asked sharp questions, and reviewed every single word of the contract they offered. Eventually, he agreed to lease them the land, but not without one very specific condition. If the bank is ever sold, merged, moved, or defaults on its payments, Ezekiel said, full ownership of the land reverts back to me or my family. No exceptions. The young bank execs didn't think much of it. To them, it was a safeguard that would never be triggered. So they signed it, stamped it, filed it, and then they forgot it. Years passed. The bank grew, changed names, changed leadership, expanded to other cities. But all the while, they remained rooted on a land they leased from the quiet old man no one paid attention to. Ezekiel, meanwhile, lived modestly. He never bragged, never bought flashy things. He paid off his home, put his kids through school, attended church, sat on park benches feeding birds. To the outside world, he looked like a man barely getting by. But that was the beauty of it. Ezekiel didn't care what people thought, because he knew that one day the agreement would come back around. And sure enough, that day came. The bank underwent a merger with a larger financial corporation, a move celebrated in press releases and boardroom meetings. But no one, not a single lawyer, not one executive, checked the old property agreement buried deep in the archives, except for Ezekiel. He watched it happen, quietly, patiently, and when the paperwork finalized, he knew the moment had arrived. That's when he put on his old boots, packed up the deed in a burlap sack, and walked into the bank to claim what had always been his. It wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was vision. It was patience. It was a kind of slow, steady power that most people overlook until it's standing right in front of them. And now, for the first time in decades, the town was beginning to realize The old man they'd ignored was the smartest one among them. As the bank's legal team reviewed the documents, silence fell over the entire lobby. The same room that had been buzzing with laughter and judgment just an hour earlier was now frozen. Eyes wide, mouths shut, hearts pounding. Every page they turned confirmed the same thing. The papers were real, signed, witnessed, notarized, filed properly with the county decades ago. The name on the documents was clear, Ezekiel Thomas, and a clause that everyone had overlooked, buried on the third page in dense legal text, spelled disaster for the bank. In the event of any change in ownership, merger, or transfer of controlling interest, the lease shall be considered null and void, and all rights to the land and structure shall immediately revert to the original lessor, Ezekiel Thomas, or his lawful heirs. That recent merge of the bank had celebrated with balloons, cake, and press coverage, that counted as a change of ownership, which meant Ezekiel Thomas now owned the land and the building. The bank, valued at millions, was now operating on his property without a valid lease. You could feel the panic ripple through the walls. The once confident manager stood speechless, gripping the edge of his desk as if it might collapse under the weight of this revelation. The receptionist who had earlier dismissed Ezekiel as a confused old man now stared at him like he was royalty. Even the security guards who had been ready to escort him out were keeping a respectful distance. Phones started ringing. Lawyers were called. High-ranking executives were pulled from meetings. A conference room was cleared. The legal team disappeared behind its glass doors with the documents and didn't emerge for a full 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Ezekiel sat calmly in the lobby, sipping a small cup of water someone had nervously offered him. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because he knew the power had already shifted. And when the door finally opened and the suits came walking out, it was clear on their faces. He was right. The head of legal, red-faced and sweating, approached him. "Mr. Thomas, sir," he began. That "sir" hadn't been there earlier. "We, deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. There seems to have been an oversight." Ezekiel raised one eyebrow, amused. "An oversight, huh?" "Yes," the man continued. "And we are hoping, very sincerely, that we can come to an arrangement, a new lease, a buyout, whatever terms you feel are fair." Fair? Now they were asking him what was fair. The same people who had laughed in his face, the same institution that had looked right through him. Now they were at his feet, praying for mercy. He let the moment hang. Then, with calm authority, he spoke. "I'll have my lawyer review your proposal. But let's be clear, I'm not the one in a rush. You are." There it was, the power shift. Complete. Suddenly, Ezekiel Thomas, once considered just a harmless old man with a sack, was now the most important person in the building. He wasn't just a man with paperwork. He was the landlord. And the bank? Well, it was now squatting. Legally speaking, they were trespassing. Every hour they operated inside that building without a proper agreement was a liability. They knew it. He knew it. And the town? The news spread like wildfire. People who had ignored Ezekiel for years suddenly remembered him. Neighbors, former co-workers, old friends. They all came forward with congratulations, some with apologies. Local media caught wind. A reporter asked him what he planned to do with the bank now that it was technically his. Ezekiel smiled. "Not sure yet," he said. "But I know one thing, I won't be laughed at again." And he meant it. Behind closed doors, the bank offered him everything: money, partnerships, a seat on the board. They begged for a new lease, even offered to buy the land outright at double its value. But Ezekiel wasn't in it for money. He was in it for principle. He'd spent decades being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. And now he had it, not because he shouted, not because he fought, but because he planned, he worked, and he waited. And when the time came, he stood up and took back what was his. Instead of seeking revenge, Ezekiel did something no one expected. He didn't demand millions. He didn't kick them out. He didn't let bitterness make the decision. Instead, he asked to sit down with the board of directors, the same people who had once scoffed at the idea of meeting a man like him. Now they were all ears. And when they gathered in that conference room, pens ready, lawyers waiting, Ezekiel didn't bring anger. He brought terms. Calm, measured, wise. "I'm not here to destroy you," he began, "but I am here to change the rules." Then he laid out 3 conditions. 1, a new lease with a purpose. The bank could continue operating. Ezekiel wasn't going to shut it down or make people lose their jobs. But from that day forward, they would pay rent, not to him, but to a trust fund. A trust fund dedicated to underprivileged youth in the community. Kids like the one he used to be, kids who walked dusty roads and dreamed big with empty pockets. The rent money would go into scholarships, mentorship programs, and small business grants for local youth. Ezekiel didn't want profit. He wanted progress. 2, no personal profit. That's right. Ezekiel refused to take a single dime for himself. He could have become a millionaire overnight, could have bought a mansion, traveled the world, eaten at the finest restaurants. But that's not what he worked for. That was never the goal. Instead, he asked for something money couldn't buy. "I want my story told," he said, "not to brag." But so the next Ezekiel, the next kid scraping together pennies and dreaming of something bigger, knows it's possible. The board, stunned, agreed. They promised to help share his story on the bank's website through community outreach and in schools, not as a PR move, but as a permanent reminder that success doesn't always look like a suit and tie. 3, annual honor for the unsung heroes. Lastly, Ezekiel made a simple request. "Every year, I want this bank to host an event," he said. "An event that honors the quiet heroes in this community. The janitors, the bus drivers, the single parents, the volunteers, folks who show up every day, do the work, and never ask for applause." He wanted those people to be seen, because he knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible. The board nodded. All 3 conditions accepted. No negotiations. No pushback. Just respect. And so, a new chapter began. That very same building that once represented cold capitalism and ignorance became something more. A place where kids applied for scholarships funded by the man who once swept floors. A place where unsung community members received standing ovations every year. A place where the story of Ezekiel Thomas lived on, not just on paper, but in purpose. The town learned something that day. That day, something shifted, not just at the bank, but across the whole town. People who once laughed at Ezekiel now looked at him with a different kind of recognition. Not pity, not curiosity. Respect. He had no designer suit, no luxury watch, still carried the same burlap sack on his back. But now, when he walked past a coffee shop, people opened the door. When he sat on a park bench, someone always stopped to say hello. When kids passed him on the street, they whispered, "That's the man who owns a bank." And they were right. But Ezekiel didn't just own land. He owned dignity. He didn't just own a building. He owned the moment. He had rewritten the rules of power, not with force, not with pride, but with patience, wisdom, and quiet confidence. As he stepped out bank that day, papers tucked back into his sack, the world didn't look different, but the people in it did. They didn't laugh. They nodded because they knew that man, the one they once ignored, had just taught them the lesson of a lifetime. Moral of the story: it's not what you wear. It's not how you talk. It's not how loud you are or how much attention you demand. It's what you build, quietly, patiently, and with purpose. Ezekiel didn't chase fame. He didn't demand credit. He didn't flash his success. He simply showed up, worked hard, and waited for the moment he was meant for. So the next time you see someone walking past you who doesn't look successful, remember, some kings walk without a crown. Some giants wear dusty shoes. And sometimes the ground you're standing on belongs to the man you never saw coming. It's not what you wear. It's not how you walk. It's what you build, quietly, patiently, and with purpose. Never underestimate someone just because they don't look successful. Some kings walk without a crown. So the next time you judge someone by how they look, remember Ezekiel Thomas, the man with dusty shoes and the deed to the entire building. Because sometimes the most powerful people are the ones no one sees coming. If this story moved you like the video, Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more true stories that prove success isn't always loud. It's steady, quiet, and built with purpose. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.